Morning, everybody. We're back. Core Use Bloody History. Continuing on with this collection of Sheriff's Department statements labeled Decker Exhibit 5323. And so we've gotten to the statement from Larry Floor. And I haven't talked about Larry Floor much in the past couple years because I have some... I did a very, very deep dive into Larry Floor many years ago. 4 or 5 years ago, to the point where I even drew out maps of where he said he walked from, right? We're going to go over his statement here in a minute, and he's going to explain what his series of events were, and I actually took the time to map it out. I went on like fucking Google Earth or whatever and tracked out how far it was, and I remember coming away from my investigation into Larry Floor feeling as though I had completely debunked his statement. But it's been a couple years since I've even looked at it, so I don't even remember what those conclusions were. The big deal with Larry Floor is whether or not he's Ted Shackley. Facial recognition says it's Ted Shackley. Now, Larry Floor, at the time of his fucking arrest in Dealey Plaza, was supposed to be only 23 years old. But the motherfucker they got a picture of is clearly way older than 23. Receding hairline and everything. So... is it Ted Shackley? Well, if you include facial recognition evidence, I'd say, yeah, it's clearly him. But here's a problem with facial recognition. Facial recognition does not always work. There's a margin of error. And I've taken 2 pictures of Jack Valente and fucking compared them to each other and said it was 2 different people. Okay, so I know that was false, right? So I can't really put a lot of stock into a lot of facial recognition. Sometimes if it's obvious and you get a 90% hit, then it's like, yeah, the facial recognition definitely worked. Such is the case with Mary Boots Roberts and Joyce Rowland, right? Like clearly the same fucking person. Clearly, when you look at it, it's just clearly the same person. So... Ted Shackley is a little different, though. He looks close enough to Larry Floor to where it could be Larry Floor. But here's the problem. Larry Floor, when you look at pictures of Larry Floor, there are some clear differences to the person who got arrested in Dealey Plaza. And then when you get into the statements they make and the statements of Larry Floor, years after the fact, you have some clear contradictions. So allegedly, Larry Floor gets arrested out of the Daltex building. But Larry Floor, when he's interviewed years later, he said that he was arrested out of the county records building. Okay, so which is it? Who knows, right? To me, the biggest thing about whether or not Larry Floor is Ted Shackley, if you want to use some supporting evidence, I'm 100%, well, I know for a fact that it was David Morales on the side of the Secret Service car as they left Dealey Plaza, right? And I can tell you with certainty, there's a guy in one of the videos, I think is it Montesana? It's either Montesana or the DCA or one of those. There's a guy walking across the street, across Houston from the Daltex towards the book depository who is clearly George Ioannidis. 100% clearly George Ioannidis, not even a fucking question. So what do you have? You have 3 members of the JM Wave team in fucking Dealey Plaza. Okay? So JM Wave was clearly they were clearly involved. I mean, obviously... they were involved. That's why George Ioannidis got sent to the HSCA, where he was the CIA point of contact after he retired, because of course he was fucking there, and he was in Dealey Plaza the whole 9 yards. So, God, I wish I could go back in time and confront these cocksuckers when they were still alive. Fuck. Well, so yeah, it's up in the air whether Larry Floor is Ted Shackley. If I had to if I had a gun to my head and I had to place a bet on it, I would say yes, Larry Floor is Ted Shackley. But at the end of the day, we have to interpret the data that we have, and this is all we have, right? So today we're just going to go over this one statement from Larry Floor, and we're going to continue on with the rest of the Decker exhibit. But I just wanted to point it out that I haven't really talked about him much because I really need to go back over my old notes on him, which one day I'll do. So, all right, so let's get started on this one. Larry Floor, 22nd November. 1963, age 23. Keep that in mind, because remember, this guy who is arrested in Dealey Plaza has an extremely receding hairline. Most 23-year-olds don't have a receding hairline. All right, this afternoon, about 10 minutes after the parade passed Poydras and Main Streets, I went to a little barbecue place on Pacific. I do not know the name of the place, and I went in and had a grilled cheese sandwich with a friend of mine Richard Bartholo, well, it's actually Richard Bartholomew, if I'm not mistaken, who works at the National Bank of Commerce. They had a radio going on in the cafe. Two gentlemen that were seated at the table next to us had the radio on. And something came on the radio about the president being shot. So I walked out with this other boy, and he went on the bank, and I walked down to the railroad tracks at Pacific and Houston Street. I was walking parallel to some of the tracks, and there were quite a few other people walking in the same direction I was going. I stopped on the east side of Houston Street across from the Texas School Book Depository. I stood there for a few minutes, and then a lady that was standing next to me, I asked her where there was a telephone, and she said that the only payphone she knew of was in the county records building. She said that there were a lot of phones on the third floor of this building that I was standing in front of, which is the Daltex. She said that she worked on the third floor, and there was probably a phone up there I could use. Okay, so he didn't go into the county records building. He went into the Daltex. All right? Clearly, he went into the Daltex. So I rode up the elevator with this lady, got off on the third floor with this lady, and we walked to the information desk, and this lady went on back to her department, to her spot. So then there was a lady at the information desk, and I asked her if I could borrow her telephone, and she said that all the lines were busy or something to that effect. So I stood there for a minute, and a fellow walked up to me. He asked me what I wanted, and he told me that I couldn't use the phone. So I walked back down to the elevator and rode it back down to the lobby. As soon as I got to the lobby, I walked back outside, and the fellow that I had talked to about using the phone was pointing out the window, pointing toward me, and said that I was the man on the third floor. At this time, two officers walked up to me and said for me to come with them. These officers brought me to the county sheriff's office. At no time did I see anyone leaving the building. The Texas School Book Depository, while I was across the street from it. Signed Larry Floor. Okay, so couple things here. According to him, Larry Floor, he just went up into the Daltex. It was the Daltex, not the county records building. Okay, he went to the Daltex, goes to the third floor. The third floor had the Maryland Belt Company, if I'm not mistaken. The Maryland Belt Company. And so there was no phone. There was no payphone on the third floor. There was no phone to use on the third floor. The Maryland Belt Company, you had to walk into the double swinging warehouse doors and turn to the left. And then there was a phone there. It wasn't a payphone. It was a regular phone for the business. So there was no phone on the third floor. You have multiple people, including Jim Braden, right, who get arrested, who says he was up there using the phone on the third floor. But there was none. There fucking was none. So I need to spend some more time on Jim Braden and dissecting his stories and all this stuff to really kind of figure out what was going on inside the Daltex at that time. I've already gone over the lists of buildings and stuff. Here's the thing with research. Like, as you pile over hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, right, things that are relevant stay in the front of your mind, and things that you feel are irrelevant kind of drift to the back, and over time they kind of disappear, right? And that's kind of where I'm at with the Daltex building. Once I pegged the shooter outside, all the stuff on the inside became irrelevant, right? Once you realize the shooter at the Daltex is outside the building underneath the fire escape, then everything inside the building becomes irrelevant, doesn't it? You fucking ain't right, it does. Which includes, unfortunately, all the Sam Bloom stuff, the Morton Jaffe stuff, the Maryland Belt Company stuff, all the weird shit going on inside there with the fucking... with the scams to sell uranium, land that had uranium on it, right? All that stuff, right? All that becomes irrelevant once you realize the shooter was outside, right? That's why they had to control the crowd in Dealey Plaza, because there were shooters in visible positions, and the vast majority of people in Dealey Plaza were part of this controlled scene. We haven't identified 90% of them. Only a handful of people in Dealey Plaza actually do we have statements from. So, all right, let me pick up from where I was. So that's the Larry Floor deal. Is it Ted Shackley? Is it not Ted Shackley? Facial recognition says it's Ted Shackley. But like I said, you can't really count on that. You need other supporting evidence, which I feel I have. But, you know, that's fractured supporting evidence. It's supporting evidence which needs evidence unto itself, right? Like, I would need evidence that it was George Joannidis there in Dealey Plaza, right? I feel the evidence of it being fucking David Morales on the Secret Service car is slam dunk 100%, right? So that would give credence to the idea that those other two guys were part of JM Wave also. Right. I mean, this ain't Robert Kennedy and we're looking for guys at the watch convention. Right. This ain't that kind of thing. That's bullshit. OK, this is not. But I'll return to Larry Floor at some point. All right. Moving on. Philip Ben Hathaway. This is a good statement, too. Just before noon Friday, my friend John Stevens Rudder Lawrence, if you have 4 names, you need to do something about that. Nobody needs 4 fucking names. Who works with me, and I and 2 other friends left the Texaco building where we worked to go to the parade. We were walking down Commerce up to Main to Ackerd, and while we were walking up Ackerd towards Main Street, we passed the man who was carrying a rifle and a gun case. I saw this man walking towards me, walking towards Commerce, and took particular attention to him because of his size. I'm 6'5" and weigh 200 pounds. This man was very tall, approximately 6'6" or 6'7", over 250 pounds, very thick and big through the chest, in his 30s. Dirty blonde hair worn in a crew cut. He was wearing a gray-colored business suit with white dress shirt, fair complexion. I remarked to my friend that there was a guy carrying a gun in all this crowd, and made a remark that it was probably a Secret Service man. I could very easily identify this man if I ever saw him again. The gun case he was holding a rifle, because I could tell it was a gun in it, and it had a combination leather and cloth gun case. Without a gun, it would have been limp, but it was heavy, and he was carrying it by the handle with the barrel of the gun, so it was up as a 45-degree angle. It was beige or tan leather and olive drab material. We can place the time that we saw this man walking in the gun with the gun, and as I recall, someone in the crowd for the time, as they said, about it was 11:50 a.m. Philip Ben Hathaway. Interesting, right? So who matches that description? There's only one guy, Jerry Hemming. But this is the only thing that indicates to me that Jerry Hemming possibly could have been in fucking Dallas. I got nothing else. Even though there's other circumstantial evidence, I know the meeting at Walker's house with Lauren Hall. There's a bunch of other shit. There's just his relationships in general with these guys. But I get the feeling, honestly, in my gut, my feeling is that Jerry fucking Hemming knew what was happening, and he got the fuck out of Dodge. He didn't want nothing to do with it. He was a genuine, he was a true mercenary. But he had principles. It was all about America, right? And this was a bridge too far for Hemming. Everything I've ever seen about Hemming indicates to me his willingness to talk to people on camera, all that stuff. All that stuff tells me he was not involved. This statement here is the only thing that would indicate that somebody matching his description was involved. And that's all it is, someone matching his description. And remember, you got to have corroboration, or you got to have a reasonable thesis in the storyline to be able to place somebody just by a description alone, right? We could do it all the time with Oswald. It's easy with Oswald because Oswald's sightings are broken into clear and distinct categories. Okay. So, all right, let me continue on. Next statement is from Charles Hester, November 22nd, 63, age 28. My wife Beatrice and I were sitting on the grass on the slope of Elm Street, where the park is located, when President Kennedy's car got almost down to the underpass. I heard 2 shots ring out. They sounded like they came from immediately behind us and over our heads. We did see the shooting. I immediately turned and looked at the Texas Book Depository building and did not see anyone. The shots sounded like they definitely came from in or around the building. I grabbed my wife because I didn't know where the next shot was coming from and dragged her up next to the concrete embankment and threw her down on the ground and got on the ground with her. There was utter confusion. The police rushed towards the railroad tracks, and I finally found an officer to go to the Texas Book Depository building. The officer I contacted was Officer Wiseman of the Dallas Sheriff's Department. All right, Gene Hill statement. Super important statement. Hopefully all the stuff that I recall is in here. November 22nd, Gene Hill, age 32. Mary and I, it's Mary Mormon, Mary and I were wanting to make some pictures of the president, so we purposely tried to find a place that was open where no people was around, and we had been standing halfway down toward the underpass on Elm Street on the south side. We were the only people in that area, and we were standing right at the curb. The president's car just came around the corner, and it was over on our side of the street just as Mary Mormon started to take a picture. We were looking at the president and Jackie in the back seat, and they looking at a little dog between them. That's a weird thing. She's the only one who saw this little fucking dog between them. It's a weird little part of the story. Just as the president looked up toward us, 2 shots rang out, and I saw the president grab his chest and fall forward across Jackie's lap, and she fell across his back and said, "My God, he's been shot." There was an instant pause between the first 2 shots, and the motorcade seemingly halted for an instant, and 3 or 4 more shots rang out, and the motorcade sped away. I thought I saw some men in plain clothes shooting back, but everything was such a blur, and Mary was pulling on my leg saying, "Get down, they're shooting." I looked across the street up on the hill and saw, this is vital. Okay, you need to fucking understand me when I say this is vital. This is fucking vital. Listen to this next sentence. I looked across the street and up the hill and saw a man running toward the monument, and I started running over there. By the time I got up to the railroad tracks, some policemen that I suppose were in the motorcade or nearby had also arrived and were turning us back as I came down the hill. Did you catch it? I looked across the street and up the hill and saw a man running toward the monument, and I started running over there. By the time I got up the railroad track, some policemen that I suppose were in the motorcade or nearby had also arrived and were turning us back as I came back down the hill. All right, so what is she seeing? This isn't very important because in Oliver Stone's JFK, he portrays it that this is Jack Ruby running from basically the area behind the book depository or next to the book depository into the railroad yards towards the pergola is what she's explaining. The monument she's explaining is the pergola. So this was portrayed in the movie as Jack Ruby. It's not fucking Jack Ruby, okay? It's so stupid. When you get into the photographs, particularly Hughes' film, the segment with William Seymour getting a signal from the man in the long trench coat, what you'll find is that the man that was seen by Jean Hill running from behind the book depository toward the pergola, as she said, that was Detective Ira Trantham. Okay, and we know it's Ira Trantham because the man in the trench coat in Hughes' film at around 136, the segment with William Seymour, that fucking man in the trench coat is the identical man who was seen arresting Larry Florer. Okay? It's the same person. All right? Period. And so the problem with Trantham is he's not supposed to be on scene for like 10 fucking minutes. He allegedly didn't get there till like 12:40. He has this big fucking story about driving away from the scene, hearing the radio, turning around, driving back, finding a place to park, getting out of his car. It took him 10 minutes stuck in traffic, right? But that's bullshit because 3 minutes after the assassination, he's seen in the Robert Hughes film giving a signal to William Seymour. From that point, William Seymour will then re-enter the book depository, go to the 6th floor, begin his descent, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. So, so that's very important. So here's the deal with these dumb fucking Kennedy researchers, and I can't believe I have to explain this to people. When you come to do investigations, real investigations, like actual fucking legitimate, like skilled, trained investigations, like I do, you understand how to cross-reference and validate timelines. All right? Cross-referencing and validating timelines is one of the top, 3 important skills that you have to fucking be able to have when putting together this shit. So you need to be able to take 5 or 6 different statements from different people who are all in the same area, same time, giving different stories, and be able to coordinate them into a single event, right? And obviously when you do this, when you do this with Jean Hill's statement and the guy who was behind the book depository who ran towards the pergola, what you have to do is you have to really dissect and analyze multiple statements from multiple people, and then you can put it all into a single chronology. And then when the cross-reference aspect here is the Robert Hughes film, right? So the various statements will create the initial timeline. Assassination happens. Man in the trench coat runs from behind the book depository towards the pergola, right? And then what do we have? We have 2 minutes later, we have a cross-reference in the Robert Hughes film with the William Seymour stuff, right? Boom. So there we have constructed a timeline based on statements. We have a cross-reference based on the fucking Robert Hughes film, right? Which is an excellent data point. And then from there, we have William Seymour goes back in the book depository, and we can trace everything else made based on statements, right? Various statements, not 1 or 2, like 6 or 7, that you have to take little bits of each one and compile it into a 3D model, right? This is what Kennedy researchers don't know how to do. It's really embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for all of them. If you couldn't figure out that Trantham was the motherfucker behind the book depository, who was then seen in the Robert Hughes film, who then arrested fucking Larry Florer, who then lied about his statement completely, if you can't look at that in one foul swoop and be like, oh my God, he lied about everything, so it's clearly him behind the book depository, right? It's fucking, evidence screams at you when you know how to look at it, right? Evidence, it wants to be interpreted. It's screaming at you to interpret it. But no one else did. Really just fucking disappointing. Can't even hold a conversation on this shit with anybody. All right, so yeah, Jean Hill, very important statement. She places Trantham behind the book depository. All right, S.M. Holland, and this is going to be one of the guys up on overpass. And this is some interesting stuff because I put Robert Bernard Baker up on the overpass, the fat guy, super fat guy, 300-pound fat guy with the white shirt who's taken multiple pictures of, who's confronted by probably Clyde Haygood as he gets off his motorcycle before he runs into the railroad yards. All those pictures are clearly available. And when you come to understand that Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick are about 20 feet away between the pergola and the fence, you come to realize, yeah, it was most certainly Robert Bernard Baker, that big fat fuck on the overpass. And so this is where I get some conflict between some of the statements of the guys on the overpass, like S.M. Holland, and other people who claim to see a rifle up on the overpass, which would indicate Robert Bernard Baker was a shooter who didn't need to shoot, right? So that's what Ryan Dawson concluded. I'll tell you that much. Ryan Dawson concluded that it was Robert Bernard Baker up on the overpass and that he didn't shoot. I see that. I can totally see that. The logic behind that makes perfect sense to me. And I definitely believe it was Robert Bernard Baker up on the overpass. But as far as did he shoot or not, and whether there a rifle, well, what we have is we have another guy fleeing from behind the knoll in a black car, potentially with a rifle, right? And then we have the arrest of Donald Wayne House, whose real name is David Wayne House. And the arrest of Kenneth Glenn Wilson up at the address on Belmont, where I put David Ferry's Ford Falcon, right, that he will flee to Hammond, Louisiana in later that night. So a lot of stuff goes on, and it all revolves around the overpass to me. And honestly, there's like a lot of things that I haven't really been able to iron out the fine details, and so I kind of ignored over the last couple of years, and this is most certainly one of them. But I did originally theorize that Robert Bernard Baker had a rifle up there. He didn't need to shoot it because Valenti took off Kennedy's head. He throws the rifle to David Wayne House. David Wayne House flees in a black car. He then, somewhere along the way, David Wayne House will swap cars with somebody, because when he's arrested up in Fort Worth, he's arrested out of a green and white two-tone car, not a black car. So, but all that to me connected directly to a potential shooter on the overpass, which would have been Robert Bernard Baker. But all right, let's get into this statement. And I've been rambling like a motherfucker today. So S.M. Holland, age 57, there's a video of his interview too, I think. I'm signal supervisor for the Union Terminal, and I was inspecting signal and switches and stopped to watch the parade. I was standing on top of the triple underpass, and the president's car was coming down Elm Street, and when they got just about to the arcade, that's the pergola, I heard what I thought for the moment was a firecracker, and he slumped over, and I looked over toward the arcade and trees and saw a puff of smoke come from the trees, and I heard 3 more shots after the first shot, but that was the only puff of smoke I saw. I immediately ran around to where I could see behind the arcade and did not see anyone running from there. But the puff of smoke I saw definitely came from behind the arcade through the trees. After the first shot, the president slumped over and Mrs. Kennedy jumped up, tried to get over back in the seat to him. And then the second shot rang out. After the first shot, the Secret Service man raised up in the seat with a machine gun and then dropped back down in the seat. And they immediately sped off. Everything is spinning in my head. And if I remember anything else later, I will come back and tell Bill. So, Bill is Bill Decker. Obviously, Holland knows Bill Decker. Interesting, right? But he doesn't claim to see anything on the fucking overpass with a rifle or anything. Or did he say that stuff and his statements were edited? But I would doubt that because he's on video and he doesn't mention anything about that. So we clearly got Robert Bernard Baker, fat guy in a white shirt in the diagonal portion of the overpass. I mean, does Holland never see this guy or what? You see, this is where we get some weird contradiction stuff in Kennedy. You got stuff you can clearly show in the photographic record that people right next to it have no fucking memory of. All right, moving on. Emmett Joseph Hudson. Okay, this is an interesting one. This is one of the guys on the steps. For some reason, there was some controversy in identifying the 3 men up on the steps. Hudson's one of them, if I'm not mistaken. So here we go. I'm presently employed by the city of Dallas, Texas, in the park department. I've been so employed for the past 6 years. My position is to take care of the property located on the west side of Houston Street, between Houston Street and the Triple Underpass. I also take care of the fountain in front of the Union Terminal. This day I was sitting on the front steps of the sloping area, and about halfway down the steps, there was another man sitting there with me. He was sitting on my left, and we were both facing the street with our backs to the railroad yard and the brick building. At the same time, the president's car was directly in front of us. I heard a shot, and I saw the president fall over in the seat. I do not know who this other man was that was sitting beside me. In our conversation, he talked about having a hard time finding a place to park. We also talked about working somewhere over on Industrial Boulevard. This man said, lay down, and we did. I definitely heard 3 shots. The shots that I heard definitely came from behind and above me. When I laid down on the ground, I laid on my right side, and my view was still toward the street where the president's car had passed. I didn't look around, but I did not see anything unusual, either anyone running, and I did not see any firearms at all. This shot sounded to me like a high-powered rifle, and that's from Emmett Hudson. So yeah, Hudson was one of the three men sitting on the steps, age 56 years old, lives in Dallas, works for the Parks Department. Again, he says clearly shots came from over his shoulders behind him. Okay, now we have the statement of John Stevens Rudder Lawrence, the associate of, what was that guy's name? Come on, Corey, don't slip. Phil Hathaway. There we go. Day 11:45, me and Phil Hathaway and two other fellows left the Texaco building where we were all working together to go see the parade and President Kennedy. Just a few minutes after we got out on the street and walking toward Ackerd, Phil called to my attention a big man he said was carrying a rifle. I looked and saw the man, and due to a big rush of noontime people, I did not see the rifle. I took particular attention to him because of his size. I was walking with my friend Phil Hathaway, who is 6'5", and this man was fairly close to his size, maybe a little taller. And he was very thick-chested and big through the shoulders, maybe 250 pounds or more, but no fat. He gave me the impression of perhaps a professional football player. He had dirty blonde hair and was a short crew cut. He was approximately in his 30s. He was wearing a business suit, and I believe it was light in color, perhaps tan, white business shirt. I could identify this man if I ever saw him. So yeah, this kind of matches the picture of the guy standing in Dealey Plaza who people say is Jerry Hemming. But like I said, I'm not really convinced that picture is Jerry Hemming. And I just don't know. We just don't know. There's not enough data to put Hemming in Dallas, and I've gone over every bit of it. I've gone over every fucking bit of it. I've watched all the Hemming interviews. I've read the Hemming testimonies, all that stuff. Well, actually, we should spend some time on Hemming. Maybe when I get through this collection of statements from the sheriff's department, we'll do some Hemming. If for no other reason to try to debunk the idea that he was involved in the assassination, or if he was, he definitely was not a shooter. Let's just hypothesize for a split second that the guy in the gray business suit with the crew cut in the same photo as the guy who's allegedly Lucien Conein. You know what I'm talking about. In that photograph, let's just assume for a second that is Jerry Hemming. Okay, then he's standing on Dealey Plaza and he's not a shooter, plain and simple. Right. So at most you have a background conspirator if he was in Dealey Plaza. At most. So Hemming, what does that mean? Ultimately, somewhat irrelevant. He becomes a very thin thread that connects us to Hall and Seymour and Howard. All right, moving on. Julianne Mercer. All right, Julianne Mercer, really important stuff, and this will get us into Jack and Sam Ruby. All right. 22nd November, Julianne Mercer. Age 23. On November 22nd, 63, I was driving a rented white Valiant automobile west on Elm Street and was proceeding to the overpass in a westerly direction, and at a point about 40 or 50 feet east of the overhead signs of the right entrance road to the overpass, there was a truck parked on the right-hand side of the road. The truck looked like it had one or two wheels up on the curb. The hood of the truck was open. On the driver's side of the truck, there were printed letters in black oval shaped, which said air conditioning. There was a pickup truck, and along the back side of the truck were what appeared to be toolboxes. The truck was a green Ford with a Texas license. I remember seeing the word Ford at the back of the truck. A man was sitting under the wheel of the car and slouched over the wheel. This man had on a green jacket, was a white male about 40s, and was heavy set. I did not see him too clearly. Another man was at the back of the truck and reached over the tailgate and took out from the truck what appeared to be a gun case. This case was about 8 inches wide at its widest spot and tapered down to about 4 or 5 inches. It was brown in color. It had a handle. It was about 3.5 to 4 feet long. The man who took this out of the truck then proceeded to walk away from the truck, and as he did, the small end of the case caught in the grass or sidewalk, and he reached down to free it. He then proceeded to walk across the grass and up the grassy hill, which forms part of the overpass. This is the last I saw of this man. I had been delayed because the truck, which I had described above, was blocking my passage, and I had to await until the lane to my left cleared so I could go by the truck. During the time that I was at this point and observed the above incident, there were 3 policemen standing talking near a motorcycle on the bridge just west of me. The man who took what appeared to be the gun case out of the truck was a white male who appeared to be in his late 20s or 30s, and he was... is there more? He was wearing a gray jacket, brown pants, and a plaid shirt as best as I can remember. I remember he had gone on some kind of had on some kind of hat that looked like a wool stocking hat with a tassel in the middle of it. I believe that I can identify this man if I seen him again. The man who remained in the truck had a light brown hair, and I believe I could identify him also if I went to see him. Signed, Julia Ann Mercer. Okay, well, she points out in her other statements that it was Jack Ruby. It was Jack Ruby inside of the car, right? So, and this makes perfect sense to me because Samuel Ruby is up inside the Dallas Morning News providing an alibi for Jack Ruby for over 2 fucking hours. Jack Ruby's out dropping people off at the Knoll and other places. He will end up at Parkland Hospital, where he's seen by Seth Cantor. He will then end up at the Texas Theater, where he's seen by George Applin. And his car will be searched by Stringfellow. The green truck, which is parked in the alley and still running, is searched by Stringfellow. Okay, so to me, this is a clear, straight line between Jack Ruby, the green truck, and I know exactly what happened to the green truck after the fucking assassination. It ended up going to Don Robert Underwood. Who's Don Robert Underwood? Maybe one day you'll find out. All right, next statement is from Austin Lawrence Miller. 22nd November, 1963. My business address is Texas and Louisiana Freight Bureau, 215 Union Terminal Building, and the number is RI 1-1396. I and Roy Shelton, who works with me, was standing on the Triple Underpass Bridge with a large group of people watching for the presidential motorcade. I saw a convertible automobile turn west on Elm off of Houston Street. It had proceeded about halfway from Houston Street to the underpass when I heard what sounded like a shot or a short second or two more shots. A man in the back seat slumped over and a woman in a bright colored dress, orange or yellow, it was pink, grabbed the man and yelled. One shot apparently hit the street past the car. I saw something which I thought was smoke or steam coming from a group of trees north of Elm off the railroad tracks. I did not see anyone on the tracks or in the trees. A large group of people concreted, and a motorcycle officer dropped his motor and took off on foot to the car. So Austin Lawrence Miller, yeah, on top of the overpass. See, another guy on the overpass doesn't ever see a rifle, right? Doesn't ever see a rifle. But that's a second witness who sees the puff of smoke, which validates the statements made by Ed Hoffman, right, who saw David Ferry up on the knoll. Makes perfect sense to me. All right, this one's from A.J. Milliken. If I'm not mistaken, Milliken was on fucking. He was the Okay, so if memory serves, A.J. Milliken was the construction worker who's standing in the Alton's photo 7, where he's already starting to run. Right on the far right side of the picture. That's this guy. He's already starting to run, and no one else is because they all fucking knew they were expecting it, right? All right, so he works for Sam P. Wallace and Claude Beard Plumbing Company, fabricating pipe for the Republic Bank building at the end of the Katy Railroad Yards and the west end of Pacific Street. I was standing on the north side of Elm Street, about halfway between Houston and the underpass. About 5 or 10 minutes before the president came by, I observed a truck from Honest Joe's pawn shop and parked by the book depository store. Then drove off about 5 or 10 minutes before the president's car came by. Honest Joe, we did a show on Honest Joe. Go back and listen to it. Just after the president's car passed, I heard 3 shots come up from toward Houston and Elm right by the book depository building. And then immediately I heard 2 more shots come from the arcade between the bookstore and the underpass. And then 3 more shots came from the same direction, only sounded further back. It sounded like approximately a .45 automatic or a high-powered rifle. Then everybody started running up the hill. A man standing on the south side of Elm Street was either hit in the foot or ankle and fell down. Then I went back to work. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think he's talking about the couple that dropped to the ground. Was it the Hesters? I don't remember. I don't recall offhand. Or the Newmans. All right, here we go. Statement Marianne Mormon. Mrs. Jean Hill and I were standing on the grass by the park on Elm Street between the underpass and the corner of Elm and Houston. I had a Polaroid camera with me and was intending to take pictures of President Kennedy in the motorcade. As the motorcade started toward me, I took 2 pictures. As President Kennedy was opposite me, I took a picture of him. As I snapped the picture of President Kennedy, I heard a shot ring out. President Kennedy kind of slumped over. Then I heard another shot ring out, and Mrs. Kennedy jumped in the car and said, "Oh my God, he's been shot." When I heard the shots ring out, I fell to the ground, and to keep myself from being hit myself, I heard 3 or 4 shots in total. After the pictures I took were developed, the picture of President Kennedy showed him slumped over. When the pictures were developed, they came out real light. These pictures have been turned over to officers investigating this incident. Yeah, the Mormon photo is supposed to show a shooter up on the knoll, but I don't think that the picture where she got the photo from, I don't think that's where Valenti was. I think he was further down a little. All right, Gail Newman. My husband Billy, myself, and our children were standing about halfway between the corner of Elm Street and the underpass. We were the last people in line going toward the underpass. When President Kennedy's car was about 10 feet from us, I heard a noise that sounded like a firecracker going off. President Kennedy kind of jumped like he was startled and covered his head with his hands and then raised up. After I heard the first shot, another shot sounded, and Governor Connolly kind of grabbed his chest and lay back on the seat of the car. When I first saw and heard all this, I thought it was all a joke. Just about the time President Kennedy was right in front of us, I heard another shot ring out, and the president put his hands up to his head. I saw blood all over the side of his head. About this time, Mrs. Kennedy grabbed the president, and he kind of lay over to the side, some kind of her in her arms. When my husband Billy said it is a shot, we grabbed our two children, and my husband lay on one child, and I lay on the other one on the grass. We started to get up, and then all of a sudden we lay back down. I don't know what it was, but another shot may have been fired that caused us to lay back down. Everyone started running back toward the brick structure. We got up and went back there. Everyone was saying, "What happened? What happened?" Some man from Channel 8 here in Dallas took us over the studio where we gave statements of what we had seen. This is all I know of the incident. It's from Gail Newman. You can see their interviews on live. Was at the Dallas Morning News that morning. All right, Gene Newman. My name is Gene Newman. I live with my parents. My father, his name is G.C. Kimbrell. I work at Reen Manufacturing Company. I was standing right on the side of the Stemmons Freeway sign, about halfway between the sign and the edge of the building on the corner. I was by myself. There were other people around watching the motorcade. The motorcade had just passed me when I heard something that I thought was a firecracker at first, and the president had just passed me because after he had just passed, there was a loud report. It just scared me, and I noticed that the president jumped. He sort of ducked his head down, and I thought at the time that it was probably scared him too, just like it did me, because he flinched like he jumped. I saw him put his elbows like this with his hands to his chest. By this time, the motorcade never did stop, and the president fell to his left, and his wife jumped on her knees, I believe it was, in the back of the car on her knees. I couldn't say that for sure, and I realized then it had been a shot. I looked in the car, and she was on her knees, and he wasn't even visible in the car. I looked around, then just everybody was running every which way. I don't know why I didn't run. I just stood there and backed up and looked around to see if I could see anything, but I just saw no one whatever with anything that resembled a gun or anything like that. I just heard two shots. When it happened, I was looking at the president and his wife, and then when she jumped in the car, I had my vision focused on her, and I didn't say anything else about the others in front of the car. The first impression I had was that the shots came from my right. It's from Gene Newman. All right, this one's from Bill Newman. Today at 12:45 p.m., I was standing in a group of people on Elm Street near the west end of the Concrete Standard when the president's car turned left on Houston. Okay, so I need to point something out real quickly here. You see, he says it's 12:45 p.m. Today at about 12:45 p.m., I was standing in a group of people on Elm Street, okay? We know for 100% certain that it was 12:30, right? This is what I would call a standard deviation in statement, in the data points in the statements that you generate, okay? So what I mean by that is it was clearly 12:30, and he says 12:45. He's clearly just mistaken, right? Apply that same thing to descriptors: height, weight, build, color of shirt, whether or not they were wearing a hat, whether or not they were carrying anything, right? This is something you learn as a cop. You learn that you have one incident happen and you interview 10 people. You're going to get 10 different statements about what happened. And what you need to do is you need to look at them all and you need to come to a general understanding of the event. And then when you look at the individual statements, be able to interpret what that person saw at that moment or what they thought they saw. And you can see the standard deviations in their statements, meaning how far from true are they in what they genuinely thought happened, right? And here, he genuinely thought it was 12:45, but it wasn't. It was 12:30. So that's not, is he wrong? Yes. But I would say that the error should be measured as a standard deviation, right? And so then when you look at the various statements made by people who saw people coming in and out of the book depository in the moments after the shooting, you have to take everything that they say, not with a grain of salt, but incorporate these standard deviations, right? Because that's what they are. They're standard deviations from the norm. And there's always going to be them. But see, some of these dumb fucking Kennedy people will try to use statements like this to clearly debunk something else when obviously you can't do that. You have to understand it's nothing more than a standard deviation. All right. Let me continue. We were standing at the edge of the curb looking at the car as it was coming toward us, and all of a sudden there was a noise, apparently a gunshot. The president jumped up in his seat, and it looked like what I thought was a firecracker had went off, and I thought he had realized it. It was just like an explosion, and he was standing up. By this time, he was directly in front of us, and I was looking directly at him. He was hit in the side of the head. Then when he fell back and Governor Connally was holding his middle section, then we fell down on the grass as it seemed that we were in direct path of fire. It looked like Mrs. Kennedy jumped on top of the president. He kind of fell back, and it looked like she was holding him. Then the car sped away, and everybody in that area had run upon that little mound. I thought the shot had come from the garden directly behind me. That was on an elevation from where I was on the right on the curb. I do not recall looking toward the Texas School Book Depository. I looked back in the vicinity of the garden. It's from William Newman. All right. Here's a name here's a name you don't see that often. I'll put it that way. Ernest J. Owens. Yesterday afternoon, Thursday, and while on my way home from work, I passed a man walking in a westerly direction on Wood Street, as well as I can remember, about Good Latimer Expressway. I was headed in an easterly direction in my car, and this was sometime between 4:55 and 5:15 p.m., and I saw this was a white male about 5'4" to 5'6" tall, heavy build, not fat, but large shoulders. This man was carrying a foreign-made rifle, long blue steel barrel, and a long yellow stock. This man was wearing a dark-colored suit, was bareheaded. He was carrying the gun on his right side in his right hand. As far as I know, I've never seen this man before, and I could not be sure that I could identify him if I ever saw him again. This man came out of the parking lot with a gun in his hand. I cannot be sure if this weapon had a scope on it or not. I would say this man's age was between 35 and 45, and he did not have glasses on. This guy was on Wood Street near the Good Latimer Expressway. I'm not exactly sure where that is. I'll have to dig into this one a little more. But this is hours after the fact. All right, J.C. Price. This is a good one. J.C. Price, age 62. This day, about 12:35 p.m., I was on the roof of the Terminal Annex building on the northeast corner when the presidential motorcade came down Main to Houston, north on Houston, and then went west on Elm. The cars had proceeded west on Elm and was just a short distance from the triple underpass. When I saw Governor Connally slump over, I did not see the president as his car had gotten out of my view under the underpass. There was a volley of shots, I think 5. And then much later, maybe as much as 5 minutes later, there was another one. That is one of the most key statements ever made because it gives us a timing of the time that Joe Smith encountered the subjects in the railroad yard, because it was Joe Smith who fired a warning shot into the air. We have 2 different references to that. I saw one man run towards the passenger cars in the railroad siding after the volley of shots. This man had a white dress shirt, no tie, and khaki-colored trousers. His hair appeared to be long and dark, and his agility running could be about 25 years of age. He had something in his hand. I couldn't be sure, but it may have been a headpiece. I don't know what he means by headpiece. Does he mean hat? Does he mean, who knows? But this is behind the wooden fence. This is in the railroad yards. Somebody with a white shirt and a rifle went running. And when he says here that there were a volley of shots, I think 5, and then much later, as much as 5 minutes later, there was another one. So what that is, that's a warning shot fired by Joe Smith, right? We have another reference, maybe we'll come across it today, of that shot fired by Joe Smith. But Joe Smith makes an arrest in the railroad yards, which I then think we see in the MCA film or the DCA film. That's erased from history. It's not in his statements. Same thing with Clive Haygood, who makes the arrest of the Wicked Witch in the back of the railroad yards, right? But that's never mentioned in his statements either. J.C. Price witnessed all this stuff, right? I should dig into some more statements of J.C. Price after the fact. He had to have seen more. All right, here we go. Barbara Walker Rowland, Arnold Rowland's wife. She's age 17. Oh, really? Married at 17 in America. Interesting. My husband, Arnold Rowland, and I came to downtown Dallas today at approximately 12:10 p.m. to see the president in the motorcade. We're both students at Adamson High School, but my husband has been ill and neither of us went to school today in order to see the president. We had taken a position at the side entrance of the sheriff's office on Houston Street and we're standing there talking. We talked about security measures for the president and had talked about the recent affair with Mr. Stevenson. Arnold told me to look up at the building, which was the Texas Book Depository, at two adjoining open windows, that there was a man up there holding a rifle, and he must be Secret Service man. I looked up, and Arnold told me he had moved back, but I didn't see anything because I'm very nearsighted, and I didn't have my glasses on. We didn't think any more of this, and about 15 minutes after the president passed, we were standing and turned left onto Elm Street and started down towards the underpass when I heard a report and thought it was a backfire. Then a few seconds, another report sounded, and another few seconds, a third report. We started running towards Elm, and that's all I know. It's from Barbara Rowland, so she didn't see anything. All right, Arnold Rowland. I'm a student at Adamson High School in Dallas, Texas. I'm employed on weekends at the Pizza Inn located on West Davis Avenue in Dallas. At approximately 12:10 p.m. today, my wife Barbara and I arrived in downtown Dallas and took positions to see the president's motorcade. We took position at the west entrance of the sheriff's office on Houston Street. We stood there for a time talking about various things, and we're talking about the security measures that were being made for the president's visit in view of recent trouble when Mr. Adlai Stevenson had been a recent visitor to Dallas. It must have been 5 or 10 minutes later when we were looking at the surrounding buildings, and I looked up at the Texas Book Depository building and noticed that the second floor up from the top had two adjoining windows which were wide open. And upon looking, I saw what I thought was a man standing back about 15 feet from the window and was holding in his arms what appeared to be a high-powered rifle, because it looked as though it had a scope on it. He appeared to be holding this at parade rest sort of position. I mentioned this to my wife and merely made the remark that it must have been a Secret Service man. This appeared to me to be a white man, appeared to have a light-colored shirt on, open at the neck. He appeared to be of slender build and appeared to have dark hair. Talking about Lauren Hall. In about 15 minutes, President Kennedy passed the spot where we were standing, and the motorcade had just turned west on Elm Street, heading down the hill, and I heard a noise which I thought to be backfire. And some of the people around then laughed. About 8 seconds, I heard another report. In about 3 seconds, a third report. My wife, who had a hold of my hand, started running and dragging me across the street, and I never did look up at this window again. This statement is true, and to the best of my knowledge and belief. So Arnold Rowland saw Lauren Hall up there with the rifle. All right, Garland Slack, otherwise known as Gigi Slack. Today I was standing on Houston Street just below. Oh, Garland Slack is also the witness at the Sportsdrome rifle range who couldn't put Oswald there, just so you know, and couldn't put the rifle there either. Today I was standing on Houston Street just below the window to Sheriff Bill Decker's office waiting for the parade. I was standing there when the president's car passed just after they rounded the corner from Houston onto Elm Street. I heard a report and I knew at once that it was a high-powered rifle shot. I'm a big game hunter and familiar with the sound of a high-powered rifle, and I knew when I heard the retort that the shot had hit something. Within a few seconds, I heard another retort, and I knew it had also hit something, and all I could see was the highly colored hat that Mrs. Kennedy had on. I couldn't see anything else. I was so sick that I went back to my office, but after thinking it over, I came back as a citizen to offer my statement if we could help in any way. During the time I was standing there, I did look up into the building where the Texas Book Depository is and saw some people, maybe 12 or 14, hanging out of windows, but I didn't see anyone with a gun. When the sound of this shot came, it sounded to me like this shot came from way back or from within a building. I've heard the same sort of sound when a shot came from within a cave, as I have been on many big game hunts. Garland Slack. Royce Glenn Skelton, age 23. I was standing on top of the train trestle where it crosses Elm Street with Austin Miller. We saw the motorcade come around the corner, and I heard something which I thought was fireworks. I saw something hit the pavement at the left rear of the car. Then the car got in the right-hand lane, and I heard two more shots. I heard a woman say, "Oh no," or something, and grab a man inside the car. I then heard another shot and saw the bullet hit the pavement. The concrete was knocked to the south away from the car. It hit the pavement on the left or in the middle lane. I then went down to my car radio to see if I could find out what happened. After I came back, the policeman asked me if I'd seen anything, and he brought me to the sheriff's office. All right. I think that's what we're going to call it for today. We got a couple. We have a good statement from Jesse James Williams ahead of us. We got some good stuff coming up. So I'm going to call it here for today. We'll be back tomorrow, first thing. Be sure to join me here and make sure you tune in later today for an episode of Bloody History World War II. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I got plenty of books available if you guys are interested in a signed book. All right, they're $50 and I can have it out to you, well, anytime. But those are available through PayPal. If you're interested in one of those, hit me up. And what else is there? I think that's about it for now. I will see you guys tomorrow.